Chapter 3 Methods of Inducing and of Awakening from Trance. The difficulties of inducing hypnotic trance have been considerably exaggerated. Nevertheless, in dealing with highly nervous subjects who do not yield easily to hypnotic influence, it may be necessary to possess considerable self-command, as well as an acquaintance with the different methods of hypnotizing, in order to be sure of doing the best and wisest thing under any circumstances that may arise. It is important also to understand how to arouse the patient in such a manner that the awakening may be easy and that it may not result in headache or exhaustion. Before giving my own personal opinions on this head, I will briefly describe the methods adopted by some of my predecessors, whom I will allow as far as possible to speak for themselves and in their own words. Dr. Richet thus explains his mode of procedure. I put the patient in an armchair directly in front of me, and then, taking hold of his thumbs, one in each hand, I subject them to firm and regular pressure for the space of 3 or 4 minutes. At the end of this time, it is usual for nervous subjects to be conscious of a sensation of weight in the arms, elbows, and wrists. I then begin to make passes over the head, forehead, and shoulders, paying particular attention to the eyelids, in front of which I make a uniform swaying movement, as if to cause the eyes to close. When I first adopted this treatment, I thought it necessary to make the patient gaze fixedly at some particular object, but later this seemed to me unnecessary. The fixed gaze may be of some small assistance, but it is not indispensable. Dr. Bernheim's method of hypnotism is as follows. I begin by telling the patient that there is nothing harmful nor extraordinary in the practice, and that this hypnotic sleep can be produced in everybody, with results most beneficial to the nervous system. I then say, look at me and think of nothing but sleep. You will feel a heaviness of the eyelids and a weariness of the eyes, which will begin to blink and to water. Your sight will become blurred. Your eyes will close. Some subjects at this point close their eyes and sleep at once. In the case of others, I repeat my injunctions and emphasize them by adding gestures of one kind or another. I hold 2 fingers of my right hand in front of the subject's eyes and invite him to fix his eyes on them, or I make passes in front of his eyes. I tell him that his eyes are closed, that he cannot open them, that his limbs are heavy with approaching slumber. And then I add, in a slightly peremptory tone, sleep. Often, this word is sufficient to turn the scale. The patient's eyes close, and he does actually fall asleep. But if the patient does not close his eyes, or fails to keep them closed, I give up trying to fix his gaze on me, as it is evident that he is one of those subjects who can continue to do this for an indefinite time, with the result that they become obsessed with the idea not of sleep but of concentrated attention. I find it a better plan to close his eyes with my hands, drawing the eyelids slowly and gently downwards, as happens in natural sleep, and keeping them closed whilst continuing the suggestion. Your eyelids are fast shut, you cannot open them, the desire for sleep grows greater, you cannot resist it. Finally, leaning over the patient, I repeat the injunction, sleep. And it is very unusual for the desired result to be delayed for more than a few minutes. Dr. Moutin, in Le Magnétisme Humain, Paris, 1907, says that his method is to sit down in front of the patient on a chair higher than the patient's own, to take hold of his hands, and to gaze steadily into his eyes. If the subject is impressionable, 10 minutes or a quarter of an hour is usually enough to induce closing of the eyelids, though not invariably actual sleep. We then let go of the subject's hands and stand up. We raise our hands a few inches above his head and let them remain there for some instants. Next, we direct the points of our fingers downwards towards the cerebellum and the shoulders, still without actual contact, extending the passes as far as the elbows, and then raise our hands once more and repeat the process for about 5 minutes. Afterwards, we make passes in front of the patient's face. From time to time, we take note of the stage of hypnosis reached. We slowly raise one of the subject's arms and abruptly let it fall again. If it remains in the position in which we have put it, it is a sign that we have produced nervous sleep. But for the production of somnambulism, a little patience is still necessary, and we should question the subject himself in order to ascertain the progress of the trance. From him, we may even be able to learn the length of time for which the passes must be continued before somnambulism supervenes. These examples will suffice to show what different methods may be employed to obtain similar results. In fact, the principle is always one and the same, and the many differences in its practical application are due to the different operators and to the varying degrees of sensibility shown by the subjects. Charcot himself used rough and violent methods to induce trance. For instance, he would suddenly flash a light in the patient's face, cause a tom-tom to be beaten nearby, or uncork a bottle of ammonia under the patient's nostrils. But he dealt with hysterical patients, and these methods would be useless with normal subjects. The two main factors which form the basis of hypnotic sleep are suggestion and the concentration of the subject's gaze, either on the operator or on some bright object. The so-called magnetic passes will also induce hypnosis, but not so readily. On the other hand, they are indispensable for the deeper states of hypnosis. I will now describe what, in my opinion, is the most practical way of inducing the somnambulistic state. As soon as the operator finds himself in the presence of the person who is to be the subject of his experiment, he will, in the first instance, take steps to put him entirely at his ease. The subject and the operator then sit down opposite one another, the operator taking hold of the subject's thumbs and fixing his gaze upon the bridge of the subject's nose. The subject's eyes are at the same time fixed on those of the operator. The operator thereupon suggests to the subject that he will soon fall asleep, and that the sleep will be calm and peaceful. If, at the end of 10 minutes, sleep does not ensue, it will be necessary to change the method and to close the subject's eyes while repeating the injunction to sleep. As a rule, the second process is successful and a good subject falls at once into the first stage of hypnosis and occasionally into a state of somnambulism. In any case, one can finally, by means of passes, produce the most profound sleep and the desired results. There are, however, some subjects with whom these processes prove unavailing, and then it will be necessary to resort to other methods. I have often succeeded in putting difficult subjects to sleep by a slight pressure on the top of the head, whilst at the same time moving the head slowly to and fro. Very frequently, no definite result is obtained at the first séance, nor even sometimes for 3 or 4 consecutive séances. But the operator must not be discouraged. A number of séances may be needed before an excellent subject is revealed. Medical practitioners with clinics at which numbers of patients are hypnotized use special apparatus to avoid fatigue and to hasten the process. Revolving mirrors and crystal balls are employed as aids to induce easy and rapid hypnosis. It is also possible to entrance some subjects by means of pressure on what are called the hypogenic zones. This is certain regions of the body which are hypersensitive to the touch. Both the situation and the number of these zones differ in different subjects, and they are sometimes difficult to locate. They may be found in the phalanges of the hand or at the base of the nails, sometimes even in the bend of the elbow or the extremity of the nose. Pressure in these zones will produce a hypnotic sleep almost instantly. As a preliminary, it is necessary to discover their situation, for in some bodies they are entirely absent. A method of hypnotizing which is employed in Java is thus described by Dr. Steiner. The hypnotist places his hands on the neck of the subject in such a manner as to make his fingers meet at the top of the neck. The carotid artery is compressed by the thumbs behind and a little beneath the lower jaw, and the pressure on the artery is directed backwards towards the spinal cord. Soon, the head of the subject begins to droop, and he falls into what is apparently a deep sleep from which he awakens of his own accord after an interval of only a few seconds. On account of the simplicity of the process and the rapid awakening, Steiner recommends this method to surgeons for use in slight operations, and he says that he has never heard of any accident resulting from its use. A further method, according to Dr. Asdale of Calcutta, is in use among the Hindus. The subject reclines upon a bed in a darkened room, and the magnetizer leans over him, with eyes fixed upon him, and with his face almost touching that of the subject. The magnetizer applies one hand to the epigastrium, while with the other he makes passes before the face and especially before the eyes. He also breathes gently and frequently into the nostrils, between the lips, and on the eyeballs. As we have already stated, the best method of waking a subject from trance is a question of great importance. In the case of persons who have never been hypnotized, it may be a cause of considerable anxiety, and hypnotists are often asked apprehensively what would happen in the event of their being unable to arouse the hypnotized subject. As a matter of fact, an experienced hypnotist has no fear of such a contingency arising. With the majority of hypnotized persons, reawakening is the simplest possible matter and can be brought about merely by lifting up the eyelids and blowing gently on the eyeballs. To prevent any feeling of discomfort, however, it is wise to precede this action by suggesting to the subject that he is about to be awakened in this way, and that he will awake very quickly and easily, in perfect comfort, and with no trace of headache or fatigue. The awakening will then take place under the most favorable conditions. It will sometimes happen that the subject, almost as soon as he awakes, will fall asleep again. In that case, the hypnotizer should renew the suggestion still more strongly, make passes in an upward direction from the wrists to the head, and breathe again upon the eyes and forehead while moving the hands quickly to and fro in front of the face. With obstinate subjects, more peremptory measures should be taken. The order to awake should be given brusquely, and the hands and feet should be sharply struck. The hypnotic sleep is, however, never permanent. The subject would, in any case, awaken after some hours of his own accord. There is no cause for anxiety. For my part, I have never seen any patient fail to be awakened after 2 or 3 commands to do so, energetically given. Experience counts for much in this matter as in others. Hypnotism, like every other science, requires long practice before it can be thoroughly mastered. Habit develops the latent powers of the experimenter, teaches him to concentrate his thoughts, to fix his gaze, and to make the requisite suggestions with calmness and authority. Without doubt, nature also counts for a good deal. Men of commanding personality will always have more influence than those of a mild and yielding disposition. In short, the best results in this, as in most human undertakings, can only be obtained by patient study and intelligent practice.